Welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a basic StudyCards app in SwiftUI using the Cloud Firestore. We will build this app using Combine and the MVVM pattern, so it can be really helpful if you have watched my 2 videos on these topics. In this video, you will further learn about how to use the MVVM pattern in combination with the repository pattern. Now, before we get started, let me demonstrate you how the app will work. So here we have our study cards, and as you can see, I have already 4 created. And if I want to flip one of these cards, I will simply tap on them and it will animate the answer for me. And I can do the same again to flip it back. Now, I can see already past questions by toggling them, but right now I haven't set any as a past question yet. On the left side, I have my Firestore open, and you can already see that the MVVM question is already in the Firestore. So it also has this boolean that it was not passed yet. So if I would just long press on this card, you will notice that the past boolean changes to true. And if I now go to the show past questions only, you will see that the what is MVVM question is also in there. But you also have the option to create your own study card pressing this plus button down here. So here you can simply provide a question. For example, what is 3 plus 4? And you can provide an answer for that and press create card. Now you will also see that a new entry was created, and you can see it is currently set as not passed yet by default. So if you would just flip this card, you will also see the new answer. And the cool thing about this is all of this is in real time. So if I would update the question in here to something like what is 3 plus 4 and the question mark, you will also see that the view updates in real time as well. So before we get to the coding, I would like to explain a bit about Cloud Firestore and the patterns we're going to use. So let me jump into Keynote for this. All right, now let's start by understanding what the Cloud Firestore actually is. The Cloud Firestore is a NoSQL document-based database to store, synchronize, and query data for mobile and web app. Now, what do I mean by NoSQL? NoSQL stands for Not Only Structured Query Language. Most of you might have heard about the SQL language, SQL. However, NoSQL is a bit different. In general, we distinguish between 4 types of them. So there's the document-based, the graph-based, the key-value-based, and the white column-based. And when we talk about the Cloud Firestore, we're generally talking about the document-based database. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you should know what the MVVM pattern is. But first of all, it is a software architectural pattern. And if you want to learn more about it, I strongly recommend you to watch my video on this, where I try to explain it with concrete examples. So the question is now why we need the repository pattern on top of the already existing architectural pattern MVVM. So in MVVM, as you know, we have the model, we have the view, and the ViewModel. So the view represents whatever is presented on the screen. So we might have a card view with the star that represents whether it was passed or not. And we might have a ViewModel specific to that card view that basically prepares the model for the view. And as you know, in general, the ViewModel owns the model, so it might own an array of cards, for example, but in this case, since it is only a card view, it might only contain 1 card. Now, when the user taps, for example, on the star, the view would notify the ViewModel that the user tapped the star, and the ViewModel would then update the model it owns. So it would change the past boolean to true, and then it would publish the update to the view, so the view can update the view state. So it can update the star from a not filled state to the filled state, like so. Now, the easiest way to think about the ViewModel is as someone who takes care about the heavy lift for the view. So you might think, all right, why not let the ViewModel also take care of the data access logic? Well, that would add another layer of complexity to our ViewModel. We could do that, but there are many reasons why you shouldn't do that. Because imagine a scenario where you have multiple ViewModels and they all have to access the Firestore database. So you would implement that data access logic in each of these ViewModels, and you would quickly have code duplication, and your code would be hard to maintain. But that's not really the only disadvantage. Another disadvantage would be if Google decides to take down the Cloud Firestore. Now, if you created your data access logic specific to the Cloud Firestore, you basically have to rewrite the logic again for each view model where you want to access that particular data source. And also for testing, it is not really convenient because you can't really exchange from the Firestore to a local store to do some basic testing on offline data, for example. Because of this and many other reasons, people decided to use the repository pattern. So the idea is that the view model basically doesn't take care of the data access logic anymore, but delegates it to a repository. So the repository is responsible to communicating to the Cloud Firestore. But you also see that here it is easily possible to change the data store. You could easily decide to switch from a Firestore to maybe an Amazon database solution as you want. So the way the communication works between the ViewModel and the repository is now that the ViewModel observes the repository, and the repository will publish updates when it notices that the data source may have changed. All right, now this is really all there is to the theory. Let's jump into the Xcode and actually start creating our StudyCards app. All right, now open up Xcode and create a new project. As always, make sure you select the app here, press next, and give it a name. I will simply call this one StudyCards. And make sure that the interface is set to SwiftUI, the lifecycle to SwiftUI app, and the language to Swift. And press next and save it somewhere you like. All right, now let me make some space here. Make sure that you choose the iPhone 11 as the simulator. And for this tutorial, I won't really use the automatic preview, so I will just collapse this here. All right, now before we can start coding, we need to actually put some Firebase dependencies. And there are many ways to do that. You could use CocoaPods or some other dependency management tool. However, I will use the Swift Package Manager. So all you have to do is go up to File and then Swift Packages. And there is a GitHub repo that actually explains you how to get it running with the Swift Package Manager. And what we have to do is provide this repo link. So I will just copy this from here. And I will also put this into the description. So let me just paste this in here and then press next. And then you can also choose the version. For now, I will just leave it like it is and press next. And this may actually take a while. So I will pause the video and continue once it's done. All right, now once it's done with the resolving, you will see the following screen. And what you want to do here is you want to select the Firebase Firestore, but you also want to select the Firebase Firestore Swift. Can press finish, and that will take care of including these dependencies to your project, as you can see here. All right, now let's go ahead and set up Firebase Firestore. Now for this, you have to make sure you go to the console.firebase.google.com website and you have to log in with a Google account. Now, once you're logged in, you may see the following screen where you already see your existing projects, but you can also create a new project by pressing Add Project. Now here it will ask you to give it a name, and I will simply call this one StudyCards and press continue. Now we can also enable Google Analytics, but I'm not really interested in that, so I will disable that. Now press create project, and this will start the process of creating your project. All right, now once your project is ready, you can press continue. Now once you're in your project, you should be able to see the following screen. And you can also start by adding Firebase to your app. Now we are interested in adding it to our iOS app, so I'll press iOS. And now it will ask us for the bundle ID. Now the bundle ID you will find in your Xcode projects. So if you go back to your Xcode and go to your StudyCards, and you also have to make sure that you choose the target. So it should be this one right here. And then you will see the bundle identifier under the General tab. So let me just copy this and paste this in here. Now you could give it a name if you want and an App Store ID, but these are optional, so I won't provide them for now. Then continue by pressing Register App. And once that is done, you will be able to download the configuration file. So let me download this. And as the instruction tell you, what you have to do is you have to move this file that you just downloaded to your Xcode project by simply dragging and dropping it in there. So let me do that. Now, once you drop it in here, it will give you the following window, and you want to make sure that you choose copy items if needed, and also create groups and also add it to the targets. Now, since I have downloaded these files multiple times, I will have a weird naming here with the 4 at the end. So actually, let me just rename this like so. Now we did this, so we can press next. Now it wants us to add the Firebase SDK using CocoaPods. However, remember, initially we just did it using the Swift package manager. So we're already done with that step as well. So all we have to do here is press next as well. And down here, it will also provide you some initialization code that you can use to set up Firebase in your app. However, if you try to find this app delegate, you won't really find it in here. But what you will have instead is now this app file. And what you can do instead of doing it in the did finish launching with option, you can simply go in here and create an initializer. And before we can start configuring the app, we have to make sure that we import Firebase. So let me type import Firebase. And then we can basically copy this line of code here. Firebase app .configure, like so. Now, if we press next, you will see that we're already done, and continue to the console. And what you want to do now is you want to set up the Firestore. So you will choose Cloud Firestore up here, and then you will want to choose create database. Now initially when you start out, you will most likely start with the test mode, but once you go into production, you want to provide more safe read and write access. So I will start in the test mode, and here you will see that the read write access is really available to anyone, and it's only expires on a specific date. In this case, it's just 1 month from today, but for us it's fine. So I will just press next, and you can also choose a location, but I will just leave it like it is right now and press enable. And once that is done, you should be able to see your Cloud Firestore. Perfect. Now we can focus on the programming part. So let me move this window away and go back to the content view. All right, now the first thing I want to do is I want to rename this content view into the card list view. So what I will do is I will command click on this and choose rename. And now I will start typing my new name. And then I press enter. Now I also want to make sure that I rename this content view previews to card list view previews. Now let's also organize our code a bit. Now this is part of the views, so it should be in a group called views. So let me create a new group in here and move that file in there. Now we will also have some other groups for the view models and models. So let me also create them. And lastly, we will also have a separate group for our repository. All right, now let me start by creating the repository class first. So we'll go in here and create a new file. And I will simply call this one card repository. Now in here, I want to make sure that I import Firebase Firestore and also import the Firebase Firestore Swift, and lastly combine. Now let me create the repository class. It's going to be an observable object because our ViewModel is going to listen to this repository. And in here I will create a private constant called store that will have access to the Firestore. Now I will also have a published variable in here, and it will contain all my study cards. So I will say study cards equal to the study card model that we haven't defined yet, but we will do now. So let me copy this and create a new file in the models group and call this one study card. Now the study card will be a struct, and we want to make sure it is identifiable so we can iterate over them in our SwiftUI views. We also want to make sure it is codable, which means it is encodable and decodable. And this is important because we are going to retrieve these cards straight from the Firestore, but we will also store them there and therefore also encode them before we store it in the Firestore. So Xcode is now complaining because it doesn't conform to the identifiable. You could simply create an ID and pass it a unique ID. But the way we do it with the Firestore is we will get the ID straight from the Firestore whenever we create a new document. Now to access it, we will first need to import the Firebase Firestore Swift. And in here, I will say document ID, variable ID is going to be an optional string. That will make sure that whenever this card is retrieved from the Firestore, the ID is automatically assigned. Now we also need some other properties. We need a variable for the question, which is going to be a string. And we will have the similar thing for the answer. And I will also need a Boolean to check if the user already passed this question. So it's going to be a Boolean and it will be initially false. Now, once we go back into the repository, Xcode should stop complaining when we use this model. Now, as soon as this repository is created, we want to make sure that it connects to this Firestore and gets the cards for us and assigns these to our StudyCards variable. Now, to do that, I'm going to create an initializer. And in here, I have a call a function that I will create now. And to actually access the cards that are already in our Firestore, all we have to do is we have to access the store.collection and we have to provide a path. Now we could pick any path we want here and I will simply create a constant for that. And I will call this one StudyCards, like so. And then I will pass this path in here and then I can say add snapshot listener, and that listener will have a query snapshot and an error to let us know if it was successful or not. So let me rename this to snapshot and error. And if there is an error, we will simply print out the error for now. And we want to also make sure that we return out of this. However, if there is no error, what we can do is we can access the StudyCards and store whatever is in the snapshot. So we can ask the documents through these snapshots, and to actually convert these documents into StudyCards, what we have to do is we have to call the compact map, which transforms each of them in a way you define it to. Now with each of these documents, I will try to basically take the document and then get the data as something that is a study card. So we have to pass a decodable model. In our case, the study card is decodable, so we can simply pass the study card.self in here. And if that fails, we will simply initialize these study cards with the empty array. Now it would be also nice to have the capability to add something to the collection so we can actually retrieve the cards. So let me create a function add. And this one will take our study card. And the way you store something into the document-based database is by simply saying store.collection. And then here we provide the path we defined up there. And we simply say add document from something that is encodable. Now remember, the study card is codable, so it is decodable and encodable. So let me pass in the study card we get passed in our add function, like so. And this is fine. However, you will see that this function can throw. So what we have to do is we have to put it into a do try catch block. So let me do that in here and copy that over there. So we'll simply say try and then add this line of code. And if that fails, I will simply return a fatal error and say adding a study card failed. All right, now let's try and see if that already works for us. So we do have a card list view, and we're currently only presenting hello world. But what we need to do is we need to have a ViewModel that actually connects to this repository and updates the view accordingly when new cards are added. So let me first create a ViewModel for this view. So I will go to the ViewModel group and choose new file. And I will simply call this one card list ViewModel. Now in here, I want to make sure I import combine, and I will create a final class card list ViewModel, which is going to be an observable object because we want the card list view to observe this ViewModel. So here we will have a published variable card repository, and we will simply initialize it with the card repository here. Now remember, the ViewModel will take care of communicating with the repository. So what we need is some kind of functions for the view. So when the user decides to add a card, that we can actually tell the ViewModel, and the ViewModel will take care of it for us. So I will create this add function that takes the study card, and I will simply say card repository dot add, and simply pass in the study card we get. Now while I'm in here, I'm also going to create another published variable, and this one is going to contain all our study cards for now. And now I will create another variable that contains the cancellables, since we're going to use combine to load the cards from our repository. So I will create a private variable called cancellables, and it will be a set of any cancelable, and also initially empty. Now when this ViewModel is initialized the first time, I want to retrieve the cards from the repository and put it into my study cards. So the way I do that is by simply saying card repository dot study cards. Now notice that we're using here the dollar symbol, and that basically means we're not accessing the array of study cards, but we're actually accessing a publisher that sends us an array of study cards. So we can subscribe to it, and one subscriber would be the assign, and we will use the key path notation here. So I will assign it to the study cards on self. And lastly, I want to store it in the set of any cancellables. So just say cancellables here. All right, now let's go into the view and try this out. So I will go back to my card list view, and in here I will create an observed object. And it will be our card list ViewModel. Now Xcode is complaining here because we haven't initialized this card list ViewModel. So we have to do it here like so, but we also have to do it in our app because here we're also accessing the card list ViewModel. All right, now let's go back to our card list view. And for now, I will simply replace this with a list, or actually let me just create a vertical stack first. And inside I will have a list, and I will iterate over the card list ViewModel dot study cards. And here I will have access to each of these cards, and I will simply just create a basic text row with the card.question. Now down here I will have a button. I'll simply call this one add mock question. And in here I will create a mock card. So I will say let card be equal to study card. And I will come up with a mock question and answer. Now I will add this card to the repository, and the way I do that is by accessing the card list ViewModel and telling it to add the study card. All right, now let's go ahead and run this on the simulator. Now here on the left side, I opened my console for the Cloud Firestore, And on the right side, I have my simulator running. So I will try to add a mock question now. And as you can see, the question is now visible here. And if we actually refresh this page, you should also see that we have now our path in the collection. So our path name was StudyCards. And this is basically the document ID that is used to identify this row. And we also have the question, the answer, and whether it was passed. All right, now you can't do much with this row because it is basically a text row, but we're going to make it a bit more fancy by creating a new card view. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, now let's go to the views and create a new file. And I will call this one card view. In here, I'm going to import SwiftUI, and I will create a basic struct called card view, and it's going to be of type view, and it will also have a body like so. Now a card needs to keep track of whether it is flipped or not. So I will create a state variable for this. And initially I want the card to not be flipped, so I will set it to false. Now to initialize this card view, I will create a card view model. So I will create a variable here. And it is going to be of type card view model. Now we haven't defined this model yet. So let me go ahead and create a new file and call it card view model. Now in here, I'm going to import combine, and I will create a final class card view model, which is going to be of type observable object and identifiable. Now in here, I will create a private constant called card repository, and it will initialize the card repository here as well. And in here, I will also have a published variable called StudyCard, and it's going to be of type StudyCard. I'll also have a private variable cancelables, and I want it to be initially empty. Now the reason why I made this class identifiable is because I want to iterate in the cardless view over the ViewModels instead of directly over the cards. So I can initialize the cards with the ViewModel of each of these cards. So therefore, in order to conform to this identifiable protocol, I have to provide some kind of ID. And we know when we load this card, there should be definitely an ID. So I will create a variable called ID, and I'm going to set it to the empty string for now. Now we also need an initializer. And the initializer has to initialize our study card. So I will pass a study card in here and simply say self.studyCard is equal to the study card we get passed. And then I want to access the publisher. So I will say $studyCard and then do a compact map. And the compact map basically gives us only those values that are not nil. And I want to make sure that I get the ID from each of these study cards. And I want to assign them to the ID property we just created on self, the view model. And lastly, I want to store this into our set of cancelables. All right, now let's go back to our card view and continue where we stopped. Now Xcode should not complain about this model now because it exists. And we can start implementing the body. Now for the body, I decided to use a rounded rectangle with a corner radius 6. Now I also want to give it a fill, and the fill is going to be depending on whether it is flipped or not. So if it is flipped, I want the color white, and otherwise I want the color purple. The frame is going to be restricting the height to a height of 120, and I will also have an overlay, and in here I will have a Z stack and an H stack, and inside of that H stack I will have another vertical stack. Now Now in the H stack, I want to have some space, so I'll create a spacer. And then in the vertical stack, I'm going to create an image for the star icon. So I can say system name, and I will set the image depending on whether the question was passed or not. So I will say card ViewModel.StudyCard.passed. So when it's passed, I want to make sure that the star.fill icon is used. Otherwise, I want to use the star image. And I want to have a spacer here as well. And then after this H stack, I want to have my text, and it will also depend on the flip state. So if the card is flipped, I will simply say card ViewModel.StudyCard.answer. So if it's flipped, I show the answer, and otherwise I just show the question. Now for that, I will also choose a foreground color, and it's also going to depend on the flipped state. So if the card is flipped, it is going to be the color.black, and otherwise it is going to be the color.white. And I would also like to have a custom font, so I will say font.custom, and you can pick any font you want. I will pick this one and give it a size of 24. Now lastly, I will add a padding to the Z stack. After the overlay on the rounded rectangle, I want to also have on tap gesture, and when the rectangle or the card is tapped, I want it to flip the card, so toggle the state here. However, I want to have a small animation there as well, so I will say with animation and then flipped.toggle. All right, now let's go back to the card list view model. Notice that we have an array of study cards here, but what I will do now is I will have an array of study card view models. So I will simply rename this and change this to the, actually I think we called this one card view model now. So let me actually rename it here as well. However, notice that we are trying to assign to study cards here. That should be now card view models. And also what we get here is an array of study cards, but not really an array of view models. So now the question is how we convert these study cards into to card view models. Now, if we take a look at the card view model, we know that it is initialized with a study card. So we can basically initialize this card view model passing the study card. So for that, I'm going to use an operator, and it's going to be the map operator. And here I will have something like this. So I will have study cards, and for the study cards, I'm going to initialize each of these cards into a card view model. And the way you do that is by simply saying card view model.init. All right, now let's go back to the card list view. And in here we have to, now while we're in here, let's also create some function for the remove and update. And for now, I will simply print to do for both of them. All right, now let's go back to the card list view and start implementing our UI. Now to create a UI that is similar to what I showed you at the beginning of the video, we have to also declare a few more state properties. So the first one we will need is the state property called showing form. And I will set it to false. Now this is for the modal presentation where the user can, for example, add a new question. And I will have another one for the toggle, whether we want to show only the past questions or not. Now I will change a bit in here. So let me just remove all of it now. And I will start with the navigation view. Now inside of the navigation view, I had a vertical stack. And at the top level, I had the toggle. And here I passed the show past, like so. And for the label, I had something like that. So what I had was a text, and depending on whether it was passed or not, it would show hide or show the past questions. And underneath of it, I had a list. And what I will do in here is a for each. And I will iterate over my card list ViewModel.card ViewModels. However, notice we want to also consider the show past boolean. So I will also do a filter in here. And I want the StudyCard.past state to be equal to what we have defined here. So this will change depending on the toggle state here. And then in here, I will have access to my card view model. And I can use this card view model to initialize the card views. So I will say card view and initialize it with my card view model. Now on the card view, I also want to have on long press gesture. And I want to pass it a minimum duration as well of 1.5. So if the user long presses on the card for 1.5 seconds, this code will be executed. And here I will do the following. I will create a variable card, and it's going to be the card ViewModel.StudyCard. And I will basically say card.past.toggle. And then I will say card list ViewModel.update the study card. Actually, let me rename this into study card so it is more obvious. So all I did was when the user long presses, I want to take the current card of that row and I will change the past state. If it was true, it will be false, and I will update it in the repository. Now remember, we haven't implemented it yet, but we will do it right after we're done with this. Now on the for each, we can do a on delete, and here we can provide a delete function. So let me go ahead and create a delete function right after the body. So in here, we will also get some offsets of type index set. And the way you delete them is by simply using the offsets that we get. And then we can use a map on it and simply say card list ViewModel.card ViewModels at that specific location that we are in right now. And then we can access the study card. And for all of these study cards that are in this index set, we want to perform the delete. So we will say for each card list ViewModel.remove. I also want to add a style to the list. So I will say list style and pass the inset list style like so. And lastly, I also want to give it a navigation title, and it is going to be study cards like so. Now we also need a button to add a new question. So I will create a button here, and the label is going to be your circle. And I decided to give it a fill color of green. And I will restrict the frame to a height of 60. Give it an overlay. The overlay is going to be the image with the system name plus. And I will also give it a foreground color of white. And when the button is tapped, what we want to do is we want to show the form. So what I will do is I will take the showing form and I will set it to true. And in here I will present a sheet, and it is only presented if the showing form state is true. Now we still have to create our form view for the sheet. So let me go ahead to the view and create a new file. It's going to be a Swift file. And I will call this one form view. And in here, I'm going to import SwiftUI. And I'll create a struct form view which is going to be of type view. Here I will have some state properties, and it's going to be one for the question, which we will need for the text field. And similarly, we will need one for the answer. And I will also have a body in here with a navigation view. And inside of that navigation view, I will have a vertical stack. And inside of that, I will have a form with 2 text fields. So the first one will say question, like so. And similarly, we will need a text field for the answer as well. Now right beneath I will need a button, and I will simply say create card. And whenever the button is tapped, I want to create a card based on what's currently in the text field. So I will say study card and pass the question and answer. Now I want the button to be disabled when no input is made, so when the question is empty or when the answer is empty. And I also want the padding here. Now for the navigation title, I will simply say new study card. Now we have one more thing we have to figure out. Now we have to somehow let the Firestore know that we have a new card here. There's many ways of doing it, but the easiest one is by having a callback. Like what you can do is you can create a variable called did add card, and here you will have the study card passed in, and it will return nothing. So what I will do here is I will call did add card with the card that I just created. And the cool thing now is if I access the form view in my card list view right here in the sheet, it will also give me access to the did add card. So I will have access to the study card, and I can simply say card list ViewModel.add the study card. And then I can hide the showing form because the user is obviously done with the creation of the card. All right, now let's go ahead and run it on the simulator. All right, now here is the question we created previously. I just noticed we forgot the padding here, but we can fix it later. But when we press here, we get the answer animated. And currently we can't update the question because we haven't implemented the update on the repository side. But what we can do is we can add a question. So if I press the plus, I get this. And then I can create another question and then give it an answer and press create card. And you should see that also on the Firestore, a new entry was created. And here we also have a new card for it. All right, now let's get the updating and the deleting working. And now to get the update and delete to work, what we have to do is we have to go back to the card repository and then create another function here for update, and it will have the same signature as here. And the same thing for the remove. All right, now let's start with the removing. Now to remove something from a document-based database, we need the document ID. However, that should be no problem because if you look at the study card, our ID of the study card is actually the document ID. So let's go ahead and access it in here. And the way we can do that is we can say let document ID be equal to the study card.id, and else we return. And now we can say store.collection at the path we have defined above, and we can simply say take the document at the document ID and delete it. Now when we delete it, we should get back either an error or nil. So we can check if there is an error by simply saying if let error equal to error. And if there is an error, I'm simply going to say unable to remove the card. And we can also pass in the localized description of the error in here. Now for the update, I will also need the document ID. So I'll just copy this and paste this in here. The updating, however, can throw, so I will have to put it into a do try catch block, similar to what we had up here. So let me actually just copy this, and I will remove this part, and the only thing that really changes is this part here. Instead of saying add document, I will say document at the document ID, and then we can set the data from something encodable, our study card, like so. And then here I can say updating a study card failed. All right, now we implemented these, however, we do not really use them yet. So in order to use them, we have to go back to our card list view model, and down here where we have our to do, we will have to say card repository dot remove and pass our study card. And similarly, we have to do it in here as well. Say study card dot update and pass the study card. Now let me run this and see if it works. All right, so once again, we have here our Cloud Firestore, and currently the pass is set to false. However, if I go to the question 1+1 and hold it for longer than 1.5 seconds, you will see it disappears, because now it should appear under the past questions, and you will see the icon here as well. Now, what we can also try is to delete something. So if I swipe and press delete, it should also disappear from here. All right, now this is really all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. I hope you got a better idea of how Cloud Firestore works and how you can use it in combination with SwiftUI. As always, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell button so you get notified when new content arrives. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.